are Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? Welcome on in to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me out on Twitter at JackBushman2, or you can also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And just a quick reminder that you could subscribe or follow along for free on YouTube and wherever you may be listening to your podcast. Make sure to go and do that real quick so that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it's available each and every day. All right, what's up, everyone? As always, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Thank you all for making the show your very first listen here to start off your day. Well, if you're actually listening to this when the episode first comes out, I usually don't do episodes at night, but it's been a few days since I've posted a show, and I wanted to be sure to get one out here today after kind of a chaotic afternoon for myself personally. So I thought, better late than never. But for those of you who are tuning into this early on Wednesday morning, thank you all for making the show your very first listen here to start off your day. I hope everyone out there had themselves a lovely Memorial Day weekend. It's good to be back in the swing of things now, though, and I thought I'd start off today's episode with what else but the Stanley Cup playoffs, as we officially now know our matchup for the 2023 Stanley Cup Final. How about the Florida Panthers absolutely marching through the final two rounds of the Eastern Conference, reaching the Stanley Cup Final, and then on the other end, the Vegas Golden Knights, despite a late push from the Dallas Stars in Games 4 and Game 5. They put an absolutely massive dagger into their hopes with a 6-0 win on the road in Game 6 to secure their spot in the Stanley Cup Final for the second time already in franchise history. And I think this is a matchup that it's safe to say that no one really saw coming, and that's what makes the Stanley Cup playoffs oh so great, is that it really just, all that matters simply is about getting hot at the right time of the year. And I wanted to kind of set the scene a little bit to a couple of months ago, right at the end of the regular season. I'm sure most folks out there are aware of this by now, particularly because it involved the Chicago Blackhawks, but the Florida Panthers are fighting for their playoff lives down the stretch of the season. They wind up dropping their final two games of the year. They probably felt like, we're probably going to wind up short here, but the Pittsburgh Penguins, the team they were chasing, of course, they lose 5-3 to the Chicago Blackhawks on home ice in their second to last game of the season. Buddy Robinson, of course, could wind up receiving the Conn Smythe from the Florida Panthers if they wind up winning the Cup. And then the Penguins, of course, also go on to lose to the Columbus Blue Jackets, a fellow bottom feeder in their final game of the regular season. The Panthers, unlikely as ever, but they sneak their way into the Stanley Cup playoffs. But oh boy, do they have a testy matchup, as they got that second wild card spot. They're going to have to face off with the Boston Bruins, the best regular season in NHL history, an absolute wagon of a team, particularly on home ice. They were dominant there throughout the entirety of the regular season. They go up 3-1 over the Panthers in that first round matchup, but the Panthers' never say die attitude was sparked right there, and then they march all the way back, go into Boston, pick up a massive Game 7 victory, and then the snowball effect just kind of took over from there. They run through the Toronto Maple Leafs, best them in 5 games, including 3 victories on the road up north of the border in Toronto. Then they absolutely devoured the Carolina Hurricanes. Well, I guess devoured might not be the best adjective to use. They won all those games by 1 goal, but the Panthers, that's what good teams do with their backs against the wall in those close games. They just find ways to get the job done. And how about Matthew Tkachuk, who's just been a force to be reckoned with throughout the entirety of the Stanley Cup playoffs? Unstoppable for the Florida Panthers with an incredible buzzer beater in game 4 there to win that game 4-3 and send the Panthers on home ice with a ruckus crowd. What a time to be alive in South Florida. Not only are the Panthers going to the Stanley Cup Final, but of course the Miami Heat just went up into Boston to pick up a Game 7 victory there. They're going to the NBA Finals. It's quite the time to be a fan of sports in the South Florida area. But yeah, the Panthers have been on an absolute roll here these last 2 rounds. They really have found their game. They've obviously found their confidence. And Sergei Bobrovsky has just been rock solid in net. I bet Carolina Hurricanes fans are still seeing nightmares of Bobrovsky in their dreams. I mean, he was that good throughout that series. Obviously, the big dogs are rolling for the Panthers offensively. Sam Bennett and Matthew Tkachuk have been an awesome dynamic duo, and it's going to be exciting to see them in action when the Stanley Cup playoffs kick off here in the next couple of days. Then, of course, on the Western Conference side of things, the Vegas Golden Knights have just been incredibly steady and have relied on their depth throughout the entirety of these playoffs. They come back after losing Game 1, their opening game of the postseason, to the Winnipeg Jets. They wind up taking those next 4 games. They get a super tough matchup in the second round with Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and the Edmonton Oilers. They obviously had some wind in their sails after a big first-round victory over the Los Angeles Kings. But Vegas, I mean, despite some worries in that series, particularly in net, Laurent Brossoit went down. Aiden Hill had to come in. They just have been rotating goalies all year long. Logan Thompson was originally their guy before suffering a season-ending injury. Jonathan Quick is now serving as the backup, but they find a way to get the job done against the Oilers. They take the opening 3 games against the Dallas Stars. Aiden Hill, really, all of a sudden the guy just gets thrown into the postseason mix, and he's turning into Marty Brodeur out there. He's been incredible. Vegas goes and takes those first 3 games. Credit to the Stars for fighting back and, like I mentioned earlier, taking games 4 and 5. But Vegas with just an absolute heartbreaker for Stars fans who are in attendance and Stars fans everywhere watching around the world. I guess a 6-0 win on the road to win the Clarence S. Campbell Bowl and clinch their spot in the Stanley Cup Final. It's been an incredible postseason so far, and can only expect it to get better when the intensity is wrapped up to the absolute max for the Stanley Cup Final. But I think this is going to be a really awesome series here between the Golden Knights and the Florida Panthers. One thing that kind of just stands out to me as far as a prediction goes, I just think Vegas is incredibly deep. They have all their lines rolling right now. The 4th line keeps finding ways to chip in. Will Carrier had a big goal to kind of kick things off and get them going. Keegan Colasar has been scoring a couple, just scored actually his first goal since the first round. But the 4th line, I should say, has been finding ways to produce and has scored a couple of goals in these past couple of games. Then you got to, of course, account for the big guns. William Karlsson's got 10 goals this postseason. Marcia So has been awesome. Jack Eichel's been leading the charge up front. Chandler Stevenson, Mark Stone. There's a lot of weapons on that offense. And then, of course, defensively, Alex Pietrangelo, Braden McNabb, Shea Theodore, Zach Whitecloud. It's a very good veteran defense back there for the Golden Knights. And like I mentioned, Aiden Hill's been playing like Marty Brodeur. If they keep getting that same play out of him in net, I love the Florida Panthers. I love the underdog mentality. And I love Armando Velez, the host of Locked On Panthers. I'm sure he's not happy hearing me say this, but it just feels like this is the time when the Cinderella run usually comes to an end. And I just think Vegas is ultimately too deep. So as far as a prediction, I'm going to go with the Vegas Golden Knights winning their first Stanley Cup in franchise history, defeating the Florida Panthers in 6 games for my Conn Smythe Trophy pick. Not much of a surprise here. If Vegas winds up winning, it's more than likely going to be Jack Eichel, unless, maybe Jonathan Marchessault has an incredible final series. Same with William Karlsson. But I believe if Vegas gets it done, it's probably because Jack Eichel is putting them on their shoulders. So that's what I got for my prediction here on this incredible matchup for the 2023 Stanley Cup Final. Couldn't be more excited for things to get underway here in just a couple of days. One other thing that I did want to be sure to mention before I kind of move on to segment 2, wanted to be sure to talk about Max Domi's postseason run thus far. Well, I guess not thus far. It came to an end. the entirety of Domi's postseason run with the Dallas Stars, because he was pretty gosh darn impressive in a middle six role for them, particularly in that second round series that went 7 games against the Seattle Kraken. Domi wound up tallying 8 points in 7 games in that series. He finished with 13 points total in 19 postseason games, 156% of his faceoffs. I think this was a trade that worked out pretty well for both sides here. And honestly, even though Dallas didn't, get over the hurdle and aren't alive any longer, it was a pretty good trade for them as well to get a guy like Domi, who I've always talked about the way he plays the game. It's exactly what you want in postseason hockey out of a guy in the middle to bottom six, second to third line. He can provide you with some offense. He's proven now that he's a much better faceoff man than anyone's given him credit for in the past year. And he plays with an edge, plays with tenacity. I thought he was really good for the Dallas Stars. Their offense just kind of as a whole died down a little bit in that series against Vegas, but a really good postseason run for Max Domi. Got to think, will the Blackhawks be giving him a lucrative contract offer here in the offseason? That's kind of the expectation and what most people around the team think, considering how highly they spoke about Domi and how Domi really enjoyed his time here in Chicago. My one concern is that now that he's gotten a sniff of postseason hockey in back-to-back years and gone on 2 semi-long postseason runs, while he does kind of want some security, does he want to be on a team? I know getting Connor Bedard makes this a more enticing choice, but the Blackhawks are still a couple of years away from playoff contention in all likelihood. Is Domi going to pass up, not chasing after the cup to go on a team like the Blackhawks? That's my one concern I have about him, but will be interesting, and he is certainly one big player to keep an eye on as free agency starts to get closer and closer. One other guy I wanted to bring up that I thought was intriguing in the Stanley Cup playoffs as well was Jesper Fast, kind of in a similar role for the Carolina Hurricanes, who fell short in the Eastern Conference Final. Someone who plays the right style of hockey. He's defensively responsible, a good skater, and has a little bit of offense in his bag as well. He's a 3-time 30-point getter at the NHL level. He's also finished with 29 points twice in his career. Just tallied 9 points in 15 games for the Hurricanes, 6 goals and 3 assists. I know he doesn't exactly fit like the rebuild model for the Blackhawks at 31 years old, but he do still need some veterans. And I do think he could be a good third-line guy that won't cost you all that much money, that plays the right way and has some experience. So Max Domi, Jesper Fast, just 2 other names that I think are in the mix of potential free agent fits for the Blackhawks come July 1st. All right, coming up in just a moment here, Hawks fans, I'll also provide an update on the 2023 Memorial Cup, which features Blackhawks prospects Kevin Korchinski, Nolan Allan, and Colton Dach. But first, I got to talk to you all about eBay Motors. And for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. And it's the exact same thing when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, make sure to head to eBay Motors, because with eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits just right the first time around. Just add your ride to the My Garage portion and look for the green check to know the part will fit, or else you'll get your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop with eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, we're back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast. Real quick, before I get into segment 2, I know I've been having a lot of new viewers and a lot of new listeners to the podcast and here on the YouTube channel. If you haven't done so already, make sure to help the boy out. Go and click that subscribe button. If you're listening to the podcast for the first time, go and hit that follow button. It's 100% for free wherever you may be getting your podcast and on YouTube, and it really does help me out tremendously. I'm on the grind right now, starting to get closer to that 1,000 subscriber mark. I'd really like to have that accomplished before the Blackhawks go on to pick Connor Bedard with the #1 overall selection in the 2023 NHL draft. So make sure to help your boy out over here. I put in a lot of hard work on this show. Go and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And also go and follow Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram too. I've been saying this for a couple of weeks. I'm going to have a giveaway here sometime soon. I got a bunch of good Blackhawk stuff that I'm literally going to be giving away for free. And I know one of the things you're going to have to do to qualify for that is to follow Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram. So make sure to get that out of the way right now at LO_Blackhawks on Instagram. I appreciate all the support. All right. Segment 2, I do want to be sure to talk a little bit about the 2023 Memorial Cup, which of course includes Blackhawks prospects Kevin Korchinski, Nolan Allan, 2 first-round picks in the last couple of years, as well as Colton Dach, a second-round pick, as the Seattle Thunderbirds, of course, won the 2023 WHL championship not all that long ago, and that secured their spot in the 2023 Memorial Cup. And it's a round-robin style tournament. It actually began last Friday. I didn't get to watch either of the Seattle Thunderbirds' first 2 games. I'm really going to make an emphasis to watch that tomorrow night, as I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. They got a pretty big matchup against the Kamloops Blazers. It was a busy Memorial Day weekend. I wasn't able to watch either of these games, but it's been a very intriguing start to the Memorial Cup for a couple of different reasons. As I mentioned, the tournament kicked off on Friday night. Seattle had their first game actually, though, on Saturday afternoon as they took on the Peterborough Petes of the OHL, as they were the champions of that league. And Seattle got off to a really good start. They picked up their first victory of the Memorial Cup, defeating the Petes 6-3. Nolan Allan actually wound up scoring his first goal of the tournament. Kevin Korchinski added a primary assist late in the game as well. Nolan Allan finished as a +3. Korchinski finished as a +2. Colton Dach didn't get on the stat sheet, but he did finish as a +2. So all good stuff there from the 3 Blackhawks prospects in Seattle's 6-3 win to kick off the Memorial Cup on the right note. Unfortunately, they weren't able to carry that momentum over into their second game of the tournament as they fell 3-1 last night to the Quebec Remparts. And because of that win, Quebec has actually now secured their spot. They officially have won the round-robin portion of the tournament and have secured their spot already into Sunday's championship game, as they're the only team that's 2-0 so far here in the tournament. They defeated not only Seattle, but they also defeated the Kamloops Blazers earlier on in the tournament as well. I wanted to mention this. Seattle, their only goal of the game, by the way, came from Nolan Allan, believe it or not, who's not a defenseman known for the offensive side of things, but he scored his second goal in as many games of the Memorial Cup. That's all the offense the Thunderbirds were able to muster up in that second game, though. And as I mentioned earlier, that now puts them in a really interesting spot going into their final round robin game against the Kamloops Blazers, a team they are very familiar with. They beat them in the Western Conference Championship and the WHL playoffs to get to the WHL Championship. So it's a team, 2 teams here that are, 2 of the most talented teams in the entire CHL. Not only, is Kamloops the host team, but they were a very deserving club to be up here with the best of the best. They also lost to the Quebec Remparts, but defeated the Peterborough Petes as well. So they've had the exact same path that Seattle has at this point. The Peterborough Petes 0-2 through their first 2 games. They're actually taking on the Quebec Remparts right now. So it's an 0-2 versus 2-0 matchup. The reason why this game between Seattle and Kamloops is so big because, well, I know it seems unlikely, but if the Peterborough Petes are able to defeat Patrick Roy and Quebec here tonight, then the loser of that game tomorrow night between Seattle and Kamloops would have to play Peterborough to get that second spot in the semifinals. So just to kind of recap, if that was confusing, I kind of confused myself diving into some of this research, but Quebec is 2-0 through their first 2 games. Even if they do wind up losing to the Peterborough Petes tonight, they're going to be automatically in the championship game. If they do beat Peterborough, then regardless of what happens tomorrow night between Seattle and Kamloops, they will be playing again in the semifinal. The only thing that matters is the team that wins that game tomorrow night will be considered as the home team and will be the second place finisher in the round robin, of course. But Looks like Kamloops and Seattle could potentially be having two really big matchups with each other here in the next couple of days. Would be absolutely awesome to see these Blackhawks prospects and the Thunderbirds find a way to pick up some wins with their backs against the wall. But they've been kind of stymied so far here in this tournament. I mean, they did put up 6 against the Peterborough Petes, who kind of been lit up so far in this tournament, but only 1 goal against the Quebec Remparts in that second game. You don't see the Seattle Thunderbirds offense, arguably the best offense in the entire CHL, put up 1 goal very often. And they haven't been getting a lot of production from their big guns so far in the Memorial Cup. Dylan Guenther has still been held without a point, a high-end first-round pick of the Arizona Coyotes. Brad Lambert, who's been an absolute weapon for the Thunderbirds since being acquired. He's only got 1 assist through 2 games thus far. Nolan Allan's been the one who's been scoring all the goals for the Thunderbirds, so they're definitely going to have to see that change if they want any chance of beating the Blazers tomorrow night and trying to get into that championship game against Quebec. All right, coming up in just a moment, Hawks fans, I still have to get into Petr Mrazek's 2022-2023 season recap segment. All right, we're back here on Locked On Blackhawks. As I mentioned before the break, still got to get into my next 2022-2023 season recap segment. I'm actually starting to get to the end of these here. I think I got 4 or 5 more players to go over, and then I'm really going to be diving into more draft profiles, as I've already started to do as well, and also my end of the season top 10 prospects list. So lots of good stuff coming. If you want to get all caught up on the season recap segments, you can easily do so. I have a playlist documented for it on my YouTube channel. Easily find that at the top. Everything's time-coded as well. You can easily jump to those segments, hear what I have to say about each of the Blackhawks and their performance this past season. Up next, though, we have none other than goaltender Petr Mrazek, who, of course, was acquired during the first day of the 2022 NHL draft from the Toronto Maple Leafs, along with his $3.8 million contract through the end of next season, in exchange for, well, the Blackhawks getting back into the first round of the 2022 NHL draft for the 3rd time. They wind up selecting defenseman Sam Rinzel with that pick. And then for Mrazek, obviously kind of the process behind trading for him, not only did it get the Blackhawks another high-end draft pick, which is really what they needed to do in last year's draft, was stockpile as many as they could get. But it also brought in a new starting goaltender, as of course they really didn't have anyone. Marc-Andre Fleury wasn't going to be coming back, obviously. They needed someone to kind of take over and get some starts in net for this team. Arvid Soderblom wasn't quite ready for that level just yet, so it made sense for the Blackhawks to bring in Petr Mrazek, and quite honestly, he was probably brought in with the tank being in mind. Of course, the Blackhawks front office didn't want to be any good this season. That turned out just great because they're going to be picking Connor Bedard here in a little less than a month. But it made sense also for what they needed to do on the ice, and Petr Mrazek had gone through some struggles in the past couple of years, did not have a good lone season with the Toronto Maple Leafs, was injury-plagued. Even when he was healthy, he didn't put up any good numbers. So it was a really sensible situation for him to kind of go into. The Blackhawks didn't have very high expectations. He'd be able to kind of try and prove himself as a starter. And, you know, if he didn't play well, that would kind of be what the Blackhawks wanted at the end of the day. And it seemed like he was going to be the clear-cut number 1 for this Blackhawks team throughout the majority of the season, but he actually ended up getting outplayed by Alex Stalock, who was just a joy to watch all season long for multiple different reasons, not only because of his performances, but because he was so entertaining while doing it as well. But Stalock kind of really wound up being the guy in the first half of the season when those two were healthy, which, you know, didn't happen very often, but it was more of a 1-2 punch when they were healthy together than I think anyone expected going into the year. But yeah, obviously Mrazek did have some hiccups early on in the season, didn't get off to the best start. He also re-aggravated that groin injury, which forced him to miss a lot of time. Stalock went down at the same time as well with a concussion. That's what forced Arvid Soderblom to have to come up for longer than the organization, I'm sure, would have liked this season. But for Mrazek, I thought all in all, he was about what I expected. And that's what I kind of try to do when I go over these season recaps, is kind of talk about the expectation. And I thought for Petr Mrazek, it was going to be a good tank goalie, a guy who wasn't going to steal very many wins, probably wasn't going to put up great numbers considering the defense in front of him. But I will say he did put together a much stronger second half of the year. Things didn't get off to the best start, as I mentioned, but he started to find his footing a little bit more later on in the season. And he also tried his best to get those numbers back to being as respectable as they could be, because in the first half of the regular season, he might have had the worst numbers to look at in the entire NHL. I mean, a goals against average above 4, a save percentage well below 900. It didn't look pretty for Petr Mrazek there for a long time, but to his credit, he did claw back in the second half to make those numbers look a little bit more respectable. But getting into the numbers here real quick, Mrazek wound up appearing in 39 games for the Blackhawks this season. He started 38 of them, which was actually the most he's made in a season since the 2019-20 campaign with the Carolina Hurricanes, where he was actually dynamite. That's really where this hype was kind of created around Petr Mrazek. That's why the Leafs traded for him, and it didn't work out in their favor. Mrazek wound up posting a 10-22-3 record in his 39 appearances this season. As I mentioned, a 3.66 goals against average, not very great, but better than it was for a lot of the year. That's actually the highest that Mrazek has ever had in a season. His save percentage of .894 was the third worst of his entire career. Slightly better, though, than what he put up last year with the Toronto Maple Leafs, where he put up .888 all across the board for the save percentage, which is not good for the NHL. He also failed to record a shutout for the second consecutive season, back-to-back years with no shutout for Petr Mrazek, 56 straight starts since his last shutout. In terms of his quality start percentage, he had a .500 quality start percentage, which, quite frankly, for this Blackhawks team is pretty respectable and better than some of the numbers he had on better teams earlier on in his career. But the goals saved above average, this was a pretty tough number from Mrazek. Negative 12.5 goals saved above average, the second worst of his entire career. So I thought these numbers were pretty to be expected out of Petr Mrazek. I didn't think he was going to be a wizard in that. I knew he was probably going to have a groin injury and miss some time. It's what's happened the last couple of years for him. And he never stole any games, but he was, a respectable goalie for the Blackhawks, probably a number 2 at this point in his NHL career. And yeah, in terms of expectations, I thought it was pretty on par. And I think the fair grade to give with that reasoning would be a C for Petr Mrazek this season. I think that's the grade that he actually deserves. And it seemed like all the fans out there kind of agreed with that for the most part. 51% of the voters on YouTube voted for a C. 24% actually voted for a B, which I thought was interesting. Probably because, like I mentioned, he did finish the year on a little bit of a better streak. He gave up 2 goals or less 8 times in his final 21 starts, as opposed to only doing it 4 times in his first 17. The Twitter voters, 54% of you said C, 25% said D/F. That's actually what I was kind of expecting to see out of the YouTube voters. A little bit of a surprise there. But by the way, make sure to go and follow at Talkin' Hockey on Twitter so you could give your 2 cents on each of those polls, and subscribe to the YouTube channel to check out the community section where I post all of these polls as well. So yeah, I think a very average season in terms of what I was expecting out of Petr Mrazek. And for that type of performance, I'm giving him a flat C. All right, folks, I think that is going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for tuning into the show. And be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube and wherever you may be listening to your podcast. It's 100% for free, and it really does help me out tremendously. Once again, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me out on Twitter at JackBushman2, or you could also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, it's going to do it here for the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.